Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ezekiel Class. We are now in Ezekiel Class number 45. And this morning we're going to be covering the end of the book of Ezekiel. We're going to be covering from Ezekiel 47, verse 13, to Ezekiel 48, 35, which is the last verses of the book of Ezekiel. We do have one more class in Ezekiel next week. It's going to be a summary class where we just kind of review all the things that we've learned over the last 46 weeks and put that all into perspective for you. So please come back as well next week. So last week we had the Millennial Temple up here on the board. It had been here for 7 classes. It is now gone, you may notice. The Millennial Temple has now been replaced. We're done talking about it because Ezekiel's done talking about it at this point. Ezekiel, during the period, or during the part that we're going to cover this week, is talking about what's called the land distribution in Israel. And this is how God will distribute the land of Israel among the Jewish tribes during that period. And there's a logic to it, and we're going to go through that logic to it as we see it today. It's not just arbitrary, this tribe gets that and this tribe gets that. So we're going to talk through what God is sending to us as a message on how he does that. Now, in the past, back in chapter 45, we looked at this section right here of the land, which is actually this right here, if you want to see it in the bigger picture. So this equals that. And what this is the sacred portion, which is 15,000 cubits on an edge. So it's a square, it's a square 45,000 cubits on an edge. And it's got 3 different sections in it. The top part is the Levites. Those are the people who just administer the temple on a day-to-day basis. The middle part is the Zadok priests. Those are the priests who will actually perform the sacrifices and will actually minister to Jesus when he's in the temple. And also in here will be the temple. This little box in the center is the temple, which used to be this board up until last week. So that is now this little box here. And the lower part is the city of Jerusalem itself. And the city is actually this little tiny square right here. And it's surrounded by a green area, which will be used for pasture land and for raising crops so the people have food. And around it will be where the people of Jerusalem live outside the city. Not everybody's going to be inside the city. So that will be this part here. And we're going to talk, and we talked about that a few weeks ago. I'm sorry, I said 45,000. It's actually 25,000 cubits on a side. And this one is 10,000 cubits wide. This one is 10,000 cubits wide. And this one's 5,000 cubits wide. And a cubit, remember, is from your elbow to the tip of your finger. So that was the measurements that builders used back in those days. We didn't have measuring tapes back in those days, although they did have measuring rods that they used, which was like a rod that would be several meters long. Now, around this area in here was an area that the prince owned. And the prince is Prince David. He is a resurrected David, so he will be in a resurrected body, just like we will be if we've accepted Christ. He will be in a resurrected body, and it will be David from the Bible, and David is the prince, and he will have this. This land the Lord calls his special gift. We're going to talk about that as we go through it, but this land is his special gift. And you'll notice it's in the center of the land of Israel. So this is how the land of Israel is going to be divided at that time. Questions on that? Okay, let's go next to verses 13 through 20, which are going to talk about the boundaries of the land of Israel. I'm going to read that to you, and it's going to get a little complex, but I'm going to explain it to you very quickly here. So this is going to be the outer boundaries, north, east, west, and south and west of the land of Israel at that time. This is what the sovereign Lord says. These are the boundaries of the land that you will divide among 12 tribes of Israel as their inheritance, with 2 portions for Joseph. I'll explain that in a few minutes. You are to divide it equally among them. So each of these is to be as wide as the others. They're each going to be 25,000 cubits wide. That's about 7 miles or so wide. You are to divide it equally among them. Because I swore with uplifted hand to give it to your ancestors, this land will become your inheritance. So God is making it clear that he swore that this land would forever belong to Israel, which is why we have all this argument going on in the Middle East today. A lot of people don't like the idea that the Lord has sworn that land to Israel. A lot of Israel's neighbors don't like that, and that bothers them. But it is what the Lord has done. So the land will become your inheritance. This is the boundary of the land. On the north side, that would be up here. It will run from the Mediterranean Sea, that's over here, Mediterranean Sea. It will run from the Mediterranean Sea by the Hethlon Road past Lebo Hamath to Zedad, Berothah, and Sibraim, which lies on the border between Damascus and Hamath. So it's just north of Damascus is where it's going to end over here. As far as Hazar Hatikon, which is on the border of Hauran. Most of these places don't exist today, so we don't know where most of these are. We do know where Damascus is. The boundary will extend from the sea to Hazar Enan, which is up to here, along the northern border of Damascus with the border of Hamath to the north. This will be the northern border. So it's basically going to come in just to the north of Damascus, Syria, and that is, we do know where that is today. That's the city today. That's in Syria today. So that is the northern border of Israel during the Millennial Kingdom. On the east side, that's down this way. On the east side, the boundary will run between Hauran and Damascus, along the Jordan River. This is the Sea of Galilee. Jesus taught here, right? Down the Jordan River, along the Jordan between Gilead and the land of Israel to the Dead Sea, this is the Dead Sea, as far as Tamar, which is further down. This is called the Gulf of Aqaba. So Tamar, we think, was down in this neighborhood down here. So it runs down beyond the Dead Sea. This will be the eastern boundary. On the south side, it will run from Tamar, that's here, as far as the waters of the Meribah Kadesh. That must be someplace out in the middle here. We don't know where that is. There's not much water there today. It's a desert today. Then along the Wadi of Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. The Wadi of Egypt is the delta of the Nile River. So it comes all the way over here to the Nile River delta, and that's where it's going to end. And it comes to the Mediterranean Sea. So it's going to end over in this area here. This is all going to be Israel's land. On the west side, the Mediterranean Sea will be the boundary to a point opposite Lebo Hamath. That's where we started from up here. This will be the western boundary. Okay, so this area here, between the blue lines and the brown lines, is the area of Israel in the Millennial Kingdom. Questions on that one before we move on? Okay. Well, now we're going to move into chapter 48. And chapter 48 is the division of the land within the land of Israel. So we now have the outer boundaries of Israel during that period. Now we're going to look at the land within the land. These are the tribes listed by name. At the northern frontier, Dan will have one portion. So Dan is going to have the northernmost section here of the land. It will follow the Hethlon Road to Lebo Hamath, Hazar Enan, and the northern border of Damascus next to Hamath will be part of its border from the east side to the west side. So it's going to follow the northern border, and it's going to also have a southern border that we'll talk about in a minute. And it's going to be, as we're going to see later, it's going to be exactly the same width as all of these others. They're all going to be exactly the same width. You may not be able to figure that out from my artwork here, but it's close. So the first one is Dan. Now, who's Dan? Let's talk about who Dan is. This is Jacob, Israel. Remember Jacob, God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. Jacob had 12 children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He had 12 children. He had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, and he had 2 servants that he had children with, Bilhah and Zilpah. So he had a total of 4 women that he had children with, and he had a total of 12 children. So there were 12 tribes. So Dan is the first one. Who is Dan? Dan is the firstborn son of Bilhah. Bilhah was a servant. She was a servant of Rachel. Rachel was Jacob's wife, his favorite wife. The wife that he wanted above all was Rachel. So Bilhah was Rachel's servant, and Dan was the firstborn son of Bilhah. Questions on that? Okay, let's continue then. Asher will have one portion. It will border the territory of Dan from east to west. So this is now the territory of Asher, is the next one. Asher is here. Asher is the firstborn son of Zilpah. Zilpah is the other servant girl. Zilpah was Leah's servant girl. So Leah is the other wife of Jacob. She was actually the first wife, long story. I'm not going to get into all that today, but she was actually the first wife of Jacob, and her servant was Zilpah, and Jacob had children with Zilpah as well. And one of those was Asher, the first one of those. Okay. Naphtali will have one portion. It will border the territory of Asher from east to west. So this is the territory of Naphtali. Again, it's 25 cubits long, 25,000 cubits long, and it's going to go all the way across from the Mediterranean over the Jordan River. So this is Naphtali. Naphtali was the second son of Bilhah. Bilhah, again, was the servant of the favorite wife, Rachel. Ephraim will have one portion. It will border the territory, Manasseh will have one portion. It will border the territory of Naphtali from west to east. So the next one is going to be Manasseh. Now you notice Manasseh is not on here of these list of 12 children. So who is Manasseh? Jacob's favorite wife was Rachel. Rachel only bore 2 sons, and this was late. She was barren for many, many years. Eventually she bore Joseph, and then she bore Benjamin. Joseph had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. He may have had more, but he had 2 sons that were specifically involved here. Ephraim was the oldest, and Manasseh was the second oldest, and Joseph saved the family at a time when there was a great famine going on. First of all, Joseph was sold into slavery by his 11 brothers, sent to Egypt. They thought that he was gone forever. They thought he was dead. It turns out that he wasn't dead. It turns out he ended up becoming the favorite of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And the Pharaoh of Egypt put him in charge of the country. He told the Pharaoh that a big famine was coming, but that there'd be a big boom until then, and that what the Pharaoh needed to do was to save up food during that boom period so that during the famine there'd be enough food for the people. The Pharaoh was wise enough to do that, so for 7 years Joseph saved up food, and then when the famine came, that food went out and fed the people of Egypt. And people even came in from other places, including from Israel. So Jacob didn't have any food in Israel, so he brought his family to Egypt. And when they got there, they discovered that Joseph had saved them. Their son Joseph had saved them. Now, by that point, Joseph had married an Egyptian woman, and he had 2 sons with an Egyptian woman. So these 2 sons here did not have a Hebrew mother, which meant they technically were not Jewish. But Late in his life, Jacob up here, the father, Jacob adopted those two as his sons. So he made them his other two sons. So he had 12 original sons of his own. Excuse me. In essence, he now had 14 sons because Joseph was still alive at that point, and he had adopted Ephraim and Manasseh. And we just saw earlier that it said that Joseph was going to get 2 shares of land, and that was because each of his sons would each get a share. So you'll notice up here the name Joseph doesn't appear anywhere on here. Joseph is not on here. What are on here are his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So those are the 2 sons of Joseph. They each get a share of the land. And as you'll find out, or as we'll find out one of these days if we ever do the Book of Kings, Ephraim ended up being the largest tribe in Israel eventually in the northern kingdom. So, questions on that before we move on? Okay, so so Manasseh has the next strip. Let's take a look at the strip after that. Ephraim will have one portion. It will border the territory of Manasseh from east to west. Manasseh, Ephraim is now here, so they are next. So we're getting closer and closer to where God is, to where Jesus is. And as we're going to talk about a little bit later, there's a logic to why God put them in this order and why he put them in this order. So bear in mind that there's some logic behind this. So Ephraim is here. Now let's continue on. Reuben will have one portion. It will border the territory of Ephraim from east to west. So now we have Reuben. Reuben is actually, where am I at here? Reuben is actually the firstborn son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. Reuben is actually the firstborn. Now in most cultures in the Middle East, most cultures in the world today, the firstborn son inherits the kingdom, right? He's the one who becomes the king. Like King Charles was the firstborn son of Queen Elizabeth and so on. And King William someday to be king, is the firstborn son of King Charles. So the firstborn son typically inherits the throne. That was the case here. And the throne in Egypt, among Jacob's people was really 3 things. Number 1 was the leadership of Israel, the kingship of Israel, if you will. Number 2 was the right to lead those people, to be their leader into the future. So that descended from Jacob, in theory, to Reuben. We're going to explain why it didn't really go to Reuben, though. And then down to his son and his firstborn and his firstborn and his firstborn. Eventually it went down through David, and eventually it went down to Jesus. And that's the 3rd part of what is inherited here. Not only is the firstborn son of Jacob going to inherit the kingdom and the right to lead the Jewish people, the first 2 things, but he's also going to inherit the seed of the Messiah. The Messiah will come from him. And obviously Jesus is God's son, but Joseph, his adopted father, was descended from David. So Joseph was descended from the firstborn son, except the firstborn son didn't deserve it. The firstborn son made a mistake. He slept with one of the maidservants here, one of Jacob's concubines. Jacob didn't like that. He disinherited Reuben. So now we go to the second-born son. The second-born son is Simeon, and the third-born son is Levi. Simeon and Levi also managed to disinherit themselves as well. They got involved in a situation. It turns out there was a sister in there as well. We don't know how many sisters, but Jacob had at least one daughter, we know that. And the sister was raped, and Simeon and Levi went and killed the people that did the raping and did it in a very brutal, ugly way. So Jacob disinherited them as well. So we finally come to the 4th-born son, Judah, and Judah is finally the one who actually gets to inherit the crown. Judah, because these 3 disinherited themselves, Judah actually becomes the one who gets to inherit the crown, who gets to lead Israel, and eventually Judah's seed will come down to David and down to Joseph, Jesus' father, his earthly father, And so the Messiah will come eventually from him. Questions on that? Okay, bordering the territory of Judah from east to west will be the portion you are to present as a special gift. This is called the special gift. That's this territory here is the special gift. It is the 13th territory. It is the one in the middle, if you will. Now, when I say in the middle, understand the geography of Israel is such that Jerusalem's actually further south in the country. It's sort of in the middle, but it's more south of the middle. So this is, so there are 7 of these up here and 5 of these down here, but this one's sort of in the middle. Bordering the territory of Judah from east to west will be the portion you are to present as a special gift. It will be 25,000 cubits wide and 25,000 cubits long. Its length from east to west will be equal to one of the tribal portions, and the sanctuary will be in the center of it. So the temple will be in the center of this. We talked about this earlier. Questions on that? The special portion you are to offer to the Lord will be 25,000 cubits long and 10,000 cubits wide. This will be the sacred portion for the priests. The Zadok priests are in here. 25,000 cubits long, 10,000 cubits wide, and the sanctuary will be in the middle. This area is specially preserved for the Zadok priests. So it will be 25,000 cubits long on the north side, 10,000 cubits long on the west side, 25,000 cubits long on the south side, and 10 cubits long on the east side. In the center of it will be the sanctuary of the Lord. That is the temple that we've had up here in the past. This will be for the consecrated priests, the Zadokites, who were faithful in serving me and did not go astray as the Levites did when the Israelites went astray. It will be a special gift to them from the sacred portion of the land, a most holy portion, bordering the territory of the Levites. The Levites' territory is up here. Alongside the territory of the priests, the Levites will have an allotment 25,000 cubits long, 10,000 cubits wide. Its total length will be 25,000 cubits, and its width 10,000 cubits. They must not sell or exchange any of it. This is the best of the land and must not pass into other hands because it is holy to the Lord. So the Levites cannot sell any of this land outside of their tribe. They can inherit it down to children and grandchildren, but they can't sell it outside their tribe. And the same thing's true of the Zadoks here, by the way. Questions on that? The remaining area, that's this area down here, 5,000 cubits wide and 25,000 cubits long, will be for the common use of the city, for houses and pasture lands. The city will be in the center of it, and will have these measurements. The north side, this is the city, will be 4,500 cubits. The south side, 4,500 cubits. The east side, 4,500 cubits. And the west side, 4,500 cubits. The pasture land for the city will be 250 cubits on the north, 250 cubits on the south, 250 cubits on the east, and 250 cubits on the west. So there's going to be a green space around the city of Jerusalem at that time. And it'll go all the way around. So what's the green space going to be used for? What remains of the area bordering the sacred portion and running the length of it. Oh, it's going to be used for pasture land. I'm sorry, the pasture land for the city. So it's going to be used for pasture land around here. What remains of the area bordering on the sacred portion and running the length of it will be 10,000 cubits on the east side, 10,000 cubits on the west side. Its produce will supply food for the workers of the city. So this area in here is going to be an area where people will live and farm and provide food for the people who live in the city. So the property of the Levites and the property of the cities will lie, and the city will lie in the center of the area that belongs to the prince. So remember, Prince David owns this entire patch of land except for this part and this entire patch of land. This part is owned by the Zadoks, the Levites, and the city. But the prince is going to own the rest of this stretch of land here, okay? What remains on both sides of the area formed by the sacred portion and the property of the city will belong to the prince. It will extend eastward from the 25,000 cubits of the sacred portion to the eastern border. That's all the way over here to the Dead Sea. And westward from the 25,000 cubits all the way over to the western border. That's the Mediterranean Sea. Both these areas running the length of the tribal portions will belong to the prince. That's David. And the sacred portion with the temple sanctuary will be in the center of them. This is the sacred portion. So the property of the Levites and the property of the city will lie in the center of the area that belongs to the prince. The area belonging to the prince will lie between the border of Judah and the border of Benjamin. So Judah's up here, and we haven't talked about Benjamin yet, but they're going to be next, so they're going to be down here. So this is where this is. Questions on that before we move on? Okay. So now we're going to move on down. We're going to continue on down. Verse 23. As for the rest of the tribes, Benjamin will have one portion. Benjamin is right here. It will extend from the east side to the west side. Benjamin, over here, is the second son of Rachel. Remember, Rachel was his favorite wife. Benjamin was also the 12th child. He was the 12th son. He was the one, the very last son to be born. And when he was born, Rachel died in childbirth, so Rachel had no more children after that. So Benjamin was the last son of Rachel and the last son of Jacob. Of the 12 of them, he was the last son. Okay. As for the rest of the tribes, Benjamin will have one portion that will extend from east to west. Simeon will have one portion. It will border the territory of Benjamin from east to west. We already talked about Simeon. He is the second-born son of Jacob and Leah. That's him here. Levi, by the way, doesn't get a portion. Levi, the priests do not, the priestly people in Israel do not get one of these portions. They have this period, they have this area up here for them. And they get it, but they get all their food. The people take care of them. So the people bring their sacrifices to the temple, and the Levites get to eat those sacrifices. And they bring their sheep in, and the Levites get to make clothes out of them and whatnot. So the Levites are supported by the people, in much the way that we support pastors of our churches or priests of our churches or whatever. Same thing. They are supported by us. And the Levites in those days were supported by the other 11 tribes, the people of the other 11 tribes. So the Levites, you'll notice Levi does not have a portion here other than this portion that's in the center. Issachar will have one portion. It will border the territory of Simeon from east to west. That's this one down here. And Issachar is the fifth-born son of Leah and Jacob. Zebulun will have one portion. It will border the territory of Issachar from east to west, so we're getting down pretty far south here. And Zebulun was the sixth-born son, the last-born son of Leah and Jacob. The southern border of Gad, Gad will have one portion. It will border the territory of Zebulun from east to west. So Gad is now the southernmost. By the way, most of this today is desert down here, but this is what Gad got down here. The southern border of Gad will run south from Tamar to the waters of Meribah Kadesh, then along the Wadi of Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. That's actually a repeat of something we saw earlier. So the southern border of Gad is the southern border of Israel at that time. This is the land you are to allot as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel, and these will be the portions, declares the sovereign Lord. So, question is, why did the Lord do it this way? Why does he want these 12 to go this way? And we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. Yeah, Deb.
I have a question. You said that technically he has 14 sons.
Yes, because under...
Wait a minute, let me explain.
Okay.
There's 14 sons. You have 12 up there plus the Levites. That's 13. Who's missing?
The other two are these two out here, Ephraim and Manasseh. In Jewish legalistics, you have certain tribes, any of the tribes other than the tribe of Levi have the ability to adopt sons. And at that point they become full sons. They have the right to inherit the property. And that's not true of Levi. Levites have to be born as priests, as Levites.
Right.
But everybody else, including the tribe of Judah, which is the kingly tribe, can adopt sons. That's how Joseph was able to adopt Jesus.
But Ephraim and Messiah are on there.
But Joseph's not.
Joseph is not.
Joseph's one of the 14.
Joseph is not here. And Levi is not here. So Joseph and Levi are not in here. Levi is in here. And Joseph is in here, but he's in here because he gets two portions.
Okay,
Manasseh and Ephraim for his two sons.
okay.
Okay?
So why is Joseph not in there?
Good question. We're going to talk about, actually we're going to kind of talk about that. The Lord, you'll notice, keeps 12 as the magic number of tribes of Israel, even though a lot of stuff's going on. I mean, the Lord did a lot of stuff to Dan, for example, because the people of Dan refused God's land when they got there and went up and murdered a whole bunch of people and took over their land. So, God took Dan out of some things for a while. The Levites, as we say, don't get land. They live off the people. I think the Lord wants to keep a symmetry of 12 is really the answer. Is the answer the way I would see it, is the Lord wants to keep the number 12 here. And what he said in essence is Joseph gets two portions. And those two portions, so both of these are Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. It said earlier Joseph gets two portions. We read that earlier. So those two portions are Ephraim and Manasseh. So I view it that Joseph is here, but he gets a double portion. And in order to keep it at 12, the Levites are out of here. So we have the other 11, the other 10. Levi's gone, Joseph's represented by these two. And that brings us to 12. Does that make sense? Am I confusing everybody? So you have 12 original sons, okay? Levi doesn't get a portion because he's the priest, and people support the priest. So now you're down to 11 sections of land. Joseph is beloved by his father and has sons that the Jews would normally view as being illegitimate because they have an Egyptian mother. Jacob adopts those and makes them his own sons. At that point, Jacob now has 14 sons, but Joseph gets two sections of land, one for Ephraim, one for Manasseh. So when you add that up, you now have 12 sections of land that are out there. So the Lord is keeping symmetry in the number 12. The Lord keeps symmetry in a lot of other ways. Once Judas dies, the apostles choose another apostle to replace him, right? So we keep symmetry. The Lord keeps symmetry among the 12s in both the tribes of Israel and in the apostles. I can't explain why, but that's important to the Lord to do that. So if it's important to him, it should be important to us, right? Okay, going on to just talking about why. As you look at this, Dan is probably the least favorite of all the children. As I said, Dan murdered a zillion people and didn't take the land the Lord gave him. Gad is another person who is far away because he comes out of one of the maids. Asher comes out of one of the maids as well, and Naphtali comes out of one of the maids. So the last three up here and the one down here all come out of the maids. Those are not as favored by God because they're not as legitimate as the other 8 children who come from Jacob's wives. So there's a logic to how that's happening. These two are not actually direct children of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, and those two are up here. Issachar and Zebulun are the last 2 children of Leah. So you have, again, children that aren't quite as far up the pecking order as some of the others. And then you have Reuben, who was the firstborn and should have inherited everything, but he screwed up and didn't. And you had Simeon, who was the secondborn and should have inherited everything after Reuben and didn't. So those two are next. And then you have the two special children here, Judah and Benjamin. Judah did inherit everything. They became the kings. They eventually had Jesus born, had the Messiah born through them. And Benjamin was one of Jacob's favorites. It was his youngest son, and it was born. And Benjamin was born as Rachel died. So there was a special connection in the Bible between Jacob and Benjamin. The other interesting thing is after Solomon died, and the kingdom broke up into 10 tribes going north, or 9.5 tribes going north, and 2.5 tribes coming south. The two tribes that went south were Judah and Benjamin. Those were the two that stayed loyal to the temple, to God's temple in Jerusalem, and stayed with the king in Jerusalem. So those two get to be closer. And of course the Levites are closer still because they are God's priests. They are his priestly people. So there's kind of some logic to how all this is doing. Questions?
Yeah, so the special portion of this will not be Jerusalem?
Jerusalem is, the city of Jerusalem is this lower piece right here. That's this piece right here is the city of Jerusalem. And it's inside the special.
Jerusalem is further south than what you have space there. They actually, Jerusalem is on the map somewhere between Benjamin and Simeon today. If you look at the map.
Yeah, you're right. My artwork isn't perfect. You're right. The Dead Sea is actually a little further south than what I have up here. This is, if you come up directly, at the head of the Dead Sea is the city of Jericho. And if you come straight up to the west from Jericho, you come to Jerusalem. So you're right, I'm off by a little bit. My apologies. My artwork is not good enough, but I'll never get artwork down. Not my gift. Andy's been talking about our gifts for the last few weeks. That is not mine. I always joke when my 4-year-old and 5-year-old and 6-year-old granddaughters are drawing that they draw better than I could ever draw. So, at any rate, thank you. I was wondering if anybody was going to notice that. When I got done, I thought, oh, I've got the Dead Sea in the wrong place. I thought, oh, nobody's going to notice that. But thank you for noticing. Okay. The gates of the new city, verses 30 through 35. These will be the exits of the city, beginning on the north side, which is 4,500 cubits long. The gates of the city will be named after the tribes of Israel. Where am I at here? The 3 gates on the north side will be Reuben, the gate of Reuben, the gate of Judah, and the gate of Levi. So that is the firstborn son of Jacob, the firstborn son of Jacob and Leah. The fourthborn son of Jacob and Leah, but the one who actually inherited everything is going to be in the middle on the north side. So he has the special position. On the north side, he will be in the middle. And then Levi, who is the priestly one, the thirdborn son, will be to the eastern side on the north. I don't know if I'm getting everybody confused. Wish I had more space up here. I'd draw this for you. Let me try to draw the city here. You've got the city, and you've got 3 gates on the north, and this is Reuben, this is Judah, and this is Levi. And then down the east side, you have Joseph, Benjamin, and Dan. So Joseph's back in here now, right? Because Levi's in here. So you have Joseph, Benjamin, and Dan are here. And then on the south side, you have Simeon, Issachar, and Zebulun. So on the south side, you have Simeon, Issachar, and what was the last one? Zebulun. And then on the west side, you have Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. So these are the 12 gates to the city. There'll be 12 gates. By the way, you'll notice if you've read further into Revelation, into the ultimate state, the new heaven and the new earth, you'll notice that there are also 12. The 12 tribes are in that as well as part of the description of the new city of Jerusalem. So God wants the original 12 founders of the state of Israel, the original 12 children of Jacob, to be represented in the city of Israel, in the city of Jerusalem. The distance all around the city is going to be 18,000 cubits. That's this distance around here. It's going to be 18,000 cubits. And the name of the city from that time on will be changed. It will be Yahweh Shammah. And Yahweh Shammah means, that's the Hebrew that's in there, means the Lord is there. Now, interestingly enough, it doesn't say the Lord is here. You would think it would. You would think the name of the city would be the Lord is here, right? But that's not it. The name of the city is the Lord is there. So a lot of ink has been spilled over that over the years, so let me just kind of give you some of my thinking as to why that's the case. How come it doesn't say the Lord is here? How come it says the Lord is there? My thought, and I don't have any special revelation on this, my thought is that what the Lord's trying to do is, instead of looking at it, we're right at the very end of the book here, and instead of looking at it from Israel's point of view, the Lord is now switching the point of view to the outside world. And the outside world is looking at this whole thing and saying, the Lord is there. As opposed to Israel saying, the Lord is here, we've got him, he's ours. I think the outside world is looking at this and saying, the Lord is there. So it's interesting. There's a reason God put this as the last words in the book of Ezekiel. Yahweh Shammah, the Lord is there. And that's, to me, that makes the most sense, that the Lord is now switching the focus right at the very end. The whole focus of the book of Ezekiel has been on Israel, right? All of a sudden, in the very last sentence, the Lord is switching the focus to the perspective of the outside world, looking at this and saying, the Lord is there. The Lord, Jesus, is right there in the temple in Jerusalem during the millennial kingdom. Questions on that? I don't know. That's my thought. Questions on that?
I just wonder if part of that might be after everything that's happened with the 7-year tribulation, that the whole entire world will say, the Lord is there.
It's kind of,
I mean, it's like, it will be so evident to not just the Jewish people, but to all. I mean, that's what you're saying.
Exactly, yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, how could it not be any more evident after everything that happened?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And everybody who comes into the millennial kingdom will be a believer. There won't be anybody on day one of the millennial kingdom, there will not be anyone who's not a believer.
But for 1,000 years, well, yeah.
Over 1,000 years, there will be people who aren't, but
Yeah.
because people will be born during that period. But,
Yeah.
So, we've now come to the last verse of chapter 48 of the book of Ezekiel. We do have one more class next week, though. I'm going to summarize the book for you and try to put together the important lessons that we learned from the book of Ezekiel. So come on back next week, and if you're at home, please join us next week as well, and we will finish up the book of Ezekiel next week. Thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone here for joining us.